Sarah Harris, a wife who seemed to have everything, and Jason Miller, the charming young boyfriend of her daughter, shared a secret that would tear an entire family apart. What began as a forbidden affair hidden behind suburban walls spiraled into betrayal, lies, and a murder that shocked a quiet community. At the center of it all was Emily Harris. Caught between the man she loved and the mother she trusted, only to lose them both in the most devastating way. This is the story of how a dangerous passion turned into a crime that destroyed everything in its path. The Harris family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing out of the ordinary seemed to happen. From the outside, their life looked picture perfect. The neatly trimmed lawn, the white fence, and the flower beds in full bloom made their home look like something out of a magazine. Inside the house, Sarah Harris worked tirelessly to keep everything in order. She was in her early 40s, graceful, composed, and the kind of woman who seemed to always have a smile ready for her neighbors. Her husband, David, was a hard-working contractor who spent most of his days on job sites, often leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. He provided well for his family but had grown emotionally distant over the years, his focus fixed on work rather than on the home he had built with his wife. Their daughter, Emily, was the light of their lives. She was a college student full of ambition, determined to study hard and make something of herself. Things began to change when Emily introduced her new boyfriend, Jason Miller. Jason was a young man in his early 20s with a charming personality that quickly won everyone's attention. He had an easy smile, confident posture, and a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. To Sarah, he seemed unusually polite and mature for his age. He complimented her cooking, offered to help with chores, and often struck up conversations with her whenever he visited. Sarah thought he was simply trying to make a good impression, but she couldn't help noticing how different he was from her own husband. David rarely engaged in small talk anymore. He ate his meals quickly, usually with his eyes on the television, and spent the rest of his evenings buried in paperwork or dozing off in his armchair. For Sarah, the spark of their marriage had long since dimmed. She still cared for her husband, but she missed the warmth, the attention, and the thrill of being desired. When Jason entered their lives, those feelings she thought had vanished began to resurface. At first, Sarah ignored the rush of excitement she felt when Jason smiled at her or asked about her day. She reminded herself that he was her daughter's boyfriend, a line that should never be crossed. But temptation has a way of seeping in quietly. When Jason complimented her appearance, Sarah dismissed it with a nervous laugh, though inside, it awakened something she had buried for years. She began to notice the way he carried himself, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, and the easy confidence he exuded whenever he was around. Their interactions started small, almost innocent. If Emily left the room, Jason would make a playful remark, something subtle that Sarah would brush aside. When she cooked dinner, Jason was the first to thank her sincerely, making her feel appreciated in ways David no longer did. These little moments stacked up, becoming more noticeable over time. Sarah tried to convince herself she was imagining it, but deep down, she knew something was shifting between them. Her thoughts grew conflicted. On one hand, she adored her daughter and wanted nothing more than to see Emily happy. On the other, she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach whenever Jason spoke to her. It was wrong and she knew it, but the pull of forbidden attraction had already begun its grip. Sarah began putting more effort into her appearance, telling herself it was for her own confidence. She wore her hair differently, chose nicer dresses, and found herself lingering in front of the mirror before Jason came over. Emily remained blissfully unaware. To her, Jason and her mother got along well, which was a relief since she wanted her boyfriend to fit into the family. She trusted them both completely. The idea that her mother might be entertaining dangerous thoughts about Jason was something she could never have imagined. Meanwhile, Sarah's inner world was shifting rapidly. What had once been a steady life built on routine now felt like it had cracks forming beneath the surface. She found herself looking forward to Jason's visits more than she should, her heart racing when she heard the sound of his car in the driveway. She told herself that nothing serious would happen, that it was just harmless attraction. But already, the boundaries were starting to blur. Late at night, when David was snoring in their bedroom, Sarah would lie awake with her thoughts tangled in guilt and desire. She wondered what it would feel like to give in, to stop resisting the temptation that gnawed at her. The shame of those thoughts weighed heavily, yet the longing refused to disappear. Jason's presence had become a spark in a life that had grown too quiet, too predictable. The Harris family, once so ordinary and untouched by scandal, was about to find itself at the center of a story that would shatter everything they had built. None of them knew it yet, But the introduction of Jason Miller into their lives marked the beginning of a chain of events that would spiral far beyond control. In the shadows of a suburban home, a dangerous affair was beginning to take shape, one that would eventually end in devastating tragedy. Sarah and Jason's connection grew stronger in ways that no one around them could see. What had started as stolen glances now turned into longer conversations and subtle moments charged with tension. Sarah found herself waiting for the times Jason would visit, carefully planning her day to be around when he arrived. She told herself it was harmless, that she was simply enjoying the company of a young man who made her feel seen. But deep down, she knew she was stepping closer to a line she should never cross. Jason fed into her vulnerability. He was bold enough to test the limits, leaving compliments that went just a little too far, brushing his hand against hers when passing a plate at dinner, holding her gaze longer than necessary. Sarah, torn between guilt and desire, let it happen. Each small act became a secret between them, one that no one else could notice. David, too busy with work and exhausted by the time he came home, remained blind to what was happening under his own roof. Their affair began quietly. It started with late-night text messages that seemed innocent at first. Jason would ask her questions about life, about relationships, about her past. Sarah responded cautiously at first, but soon her replies became longer, more personal. The conversations quickly grew intimate, filled with confessions that Sarah had never shared with anyone else. She told herself it was just friendship, but when Jason's words turned flirtatious, she didn't stop him. She welcomed the thrill of being wanted. Soon, they began arranging private meetings. When Emily was out with friends or studying late, Jason would find excuses to stop by. Sometimes it was under the pretense of picking something up he had left at the house. Other times he simply showed up. Sarah allowed it, and what started as subtle touches turned into kisses stolen in the kitchen, the living room, or the car parked discreetly down the street. Their secret grew bolder with every encounter, and the fear of being caught only heightened the excitement. Sarah's emotions spiraled out of control. She knew she was betraying her daughter, and the weight of it pressed down on her every day. She tried to act normal around Emily, but guilt made her nervous, her smiles strained and her conversations awkward. Emily noticed her mother seemed distracted, but she assumed it was stress from managing the house while her father was always busy. Emily never thought to question her boyfriend's sudden mood swings or his tendency to be less available. She chalked it up to school and work pressures, never suspecting that the truth was far darker. Sarah became skilled at hiding the affair, but her conscience tormented her. Nights were the worst, lying awake beside David, who slept soundly and trusted her completely. She thought about the betrayal she was committing under her own roof. Yet, each time Jason touched her hand or whispered something meant only for her, she pushed those thoughts away. The need for validation and passion drowned out the guilt that should have stopped her. Jason, for his part, seemed to enjoy the power he had over the situation. With Emily, he was attentive enough to keep suspicion at bay, but his interest in her was fading. Sarah became his obsession, a forbidden relationship that gave him both excitement and control. His confidence only grew the deeper they fell into the secret. He knew how much Sarah needed him, how starved she was for affection, and he exploited it without hesitation. As weeks passed, Emily began noticing cracks in her relationship. Jason canceled plans more frequently and avoided answering some of her calls. When she pressed him about it, he would give vague excuses, and Emily, not wanting to push him away, accepted them. But she started confiding in her friends that something didn't feel right. They told her he might be seeing someone else, though none of them could imagine who it might be. Emily dismissed the idea of another woman entirely. She trusted her mother completely, and the thought of betrayal from within her family never crossed her mind. Sarah's world, however, was becoming harder to balance. She felt torn between two identities: the mother and wife who was supposed to keep her family intact, and the woman indulging in a dangerous affair. She tried to convince herself that no one was getting hurt, that as long as it remained a secret, life could go on as it was. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface, and the more she and Jason gave in to their desires, the more careless they became. Small signs began to appear. Emily once noticed her mother's phone light up with a message from Jason late at night. Sarah quickly brushed it off as him asking about something trivial, but her rushed explanation lingered in Emily's mind. Another time, a neighbor mentioned seeing Sarah and Jason talking outside in the driveway for much longer than seemed normal. Sarah laughed it away, but her heart raced at the thought of how close the truth was to being discovered. The affair had grown into something neither of them could easily walk away from. It wasn't just passion anymore. It was a tangled web of lies, guilt, and obsession. Sarah felt trapped between protecting her family and indulging in the one thing that made her feel alive. Jason pushed for more time, more secrecy, and more commitment, while Emily unknowingly stood at the center of a storm building around her. The suburban house that once seemed ordinary and peaceful was now holding a secret powerful enough to destroy everyone inside it. The longer it went on, the more dangerous it became, and Sarah could no longer deny the sense that everything was moving toward an inevitable collapse. The truth was coming closer to the surface, and once it did, the fallout would be far worse than she ever imagined. Emily had always trusted her instincts, and for weeks they had been telling her that something about Jason was off. He no longer seemed as excited to spend time with her, and when they were together, his attention drifted easily. He avoided eye contact more often and kept his phone close by, quickly locking it whenever she got too near. At first, Emily brushed it aside, telling herself every relationship went through phases. But the unease never left her. The cracks in their bond were widening, and she could no longer ignore them. One evening, Emily picked up Jason's phone when he left it on the couch. She only meant to check the time, but a notification flashed across the screen. It was a message from her mother. The words were short but unmistakably intimate. Her hands shook as she opened the conversation. What she saw made her stomach turn cold. There were weeks of messages, late-night exchanges filled with affection and secret arrangements. Every line confirmed what she feared but had never dared to imagine. Her mother and her boyfriend had been carrying on a secret affair behind her back. The discovery felt like a knife to the chest. Emily's heart raced as she scrolled through the messages, her mind reeling with betrayal. She couldn't understand how her mother, the woman she trusted most, could do this to her. The walls of the house seemed to close in around her as the weight of the truth sank in. She put the phone down quickly when she heard footsteps, her face pale and her body trembling. When she confronted Sarah, the house turned into a battlefield. At first, Sarah tried to deny it, stumbling over excuses and insisting it was a misunderstanding, but Emily had the proof in her hands. There was no way to hide from it anymore. Eventually Sarah broke down, admitting that the affair was real. The words shattered what little trust remained between them. Emily's pain turned to rage as she realized her own mother had not only betrayed her, but had chosen the very person she loved to destroy their bond. From that moment on, the relationship between mother and daughter was broken beyond repair. Emily stopped speaking to Sarah except in cold, clipped sentences. Jason tried to explain himself, offering apologies that only deepened her disgust. Emily wanted nothing to do with him, and her once bright future suddenly felt like it had been stolen. Every time she looked at her mother, she saw a stranger. David, unaware of the storm raging inside his family, sensed that something was wrong but couldn't pinpoint what it was. The tension in the house was undeniable. Emily avoided family dinners, Sarah's nervous energy filled the room, and Jason's presence became less frequent. David asked questions, but neither his wife nor his daughter gave him answers. The truth hovered like a shadow no one dared to name. Sarah lived in constant fear that David would find out. She knew that if he discovered the affair, their marriage and family would be destroyed. Her guilt was suffocating, but her attachment to Jason kept pulling her deeper into the mess she had created. She told herself she could manage it, that she could somehow balance the lie with the truth. But each day made that harder to believe. Emily, meanwhile, confided in a close friend, unable to hold the secret inside. She shared how she had discovered the messages and how her world had fallen apart. Her friend urged her to expose everything, to tell her father the truth and let the affair come into the open. But Emily hesitated. As much as she hated what her mother had done, she still feared what the revelation would do to her family. The thought of watching her father break under the truth was almost unbearable. But the silence between them became its own kind of poison. Sarah tried to mend things with Emily, but every attempt only deepened the divide. Emily's cold stares and distant behavior were constant reminders of the damage that had been done. Jason, sensing his place in the family was collapsing, grew frustrated. He wanted Sarah to choose him completely, to leave behind the life that stood in their way. His impatience began to pressure Sarah into making decisions she wasn't ready to face. The affair was no longer just a secret romance. It had become a fuse waiting to ignite. Emily's discovery had shifted everything, and the fragile balance Sarah had been trying to maintain was gone. With each passing day, the risk of exposure grew. The walls were closing in, and the weight of betrayal was too heavy to keep hidden forever. It was in that pressure that desperation began to take root. Sarah could see the life she had built crumbling. She feared losing her daughter forever, feared the shame that would follow if David learned the truth. The secret had already broken Emily's trust, But Sarah convinced herself that the situation could spiral further if she didn't act. Her choices, clouded by fear and guilt, set the stage for something far more dangerous than betrayal alone. What began as stolen glances and thrilling secrecy had now turned into chaos. The truth had been uncovered by the one person Sarah had hoped would never know. The fragile threads holding her family together were unraveling quickly, and in the silence of their home, the shadow of something darker was beginning to form. The affair had opened the door to destruction, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences would become irreversible. The decision was not made in a single night, but rather grew out of desperation and fear that wrapped tighter around Sarah with each passing day. Her marriage was crumbling, her daughter no longer looked at her with love, and the secret affair had turned into something heavy and suffocating. Jason became the only person she felt she could turn to, the only one who still made her feel wanted. But Jason's influence was dangerous. He began to suggest that the only way they could truly be together without fear of discovery was if David were no longer in the picture. At first, Sarah resisted. The thought of hurting her husband was unthinkable. Yet the more the tension at home grew, the more plausible Jason's words began to sound. David had started noticing the changes around him. He asked Sarah why Emily barely spoke to her, why dinners had turned quiet and heavy. He questioned why Sarah seemed distracted and distant. Sarah's answers never satisfied him, but he was too busy with work to push harder. Still, suspicion lingered in his mind, and Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth. The idea of being exposed, of losing everything, terrified her. Jason exploited that fear, telling her it was either David or their future together. Slowly, she began to believe it. The plan they came up with was crude and careless, born not of strategy but of panic. One evening, Sarah told David that a light in the garage had stopped working. She asked him to take a look after dinner, knowing Jason would already be waiting nearby. She tried to act calm, but her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear herself speak. David agreed without suspicion, unaware that he was walking straight into a trap. As David bent over the workbench to inspect the fixture, Jason stepped from the shadows with a heavy wrench in his hand. The blow came suddenly, landing across the back of David's head with sickening force. He collapsed instantly, the sound echoing through the garage. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat as she watched her husband's body crumple to the floor. Jason struck again to make sure there was no movement. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's entire body shook, the reality of what they had done crashing over her. They scrambled to stage the scene, trying to disguise it as a tragic accident. Jason placed the wrench near David's hand, while Sarah knocked over a ladder and scattered tools to create chaos around the body. They rehearsed what they would say, insisting that David had been fixing the light when he slipped and fell. But their fear made them careless. The details didn't line up, and the panic in their voices made their story unconvincing. Neighbors had already become suspicious of strange noises coming from the house that night. One called emergency services after hearing what sounded like a loud crash and muffled shouting. When authorities arrived, Sarah tried to play the grieving wife, but her act was unsteady. Her tears were real, but not for the reasons she pretended. Investigators quickly noticed the inconsistencies. The injuries to David's head were too severe to match a simple fall, and the placement of the tools looked staged. The more questions they asked, the more Sarah stumbled over her answers. Emily's grief turned into suspicion almost immediately. Though devastated by her father's death, she could not ignore what she already knew about her mother's affair. The pieces connected in her mind, and her anger boiled over. She told investigators about the secret relationship between Sarah and Jason, explaining how she had discovered the messages weeks earlier. Her testimony provided motive, and suddenly the story Sarah tried to sell unraveled completely. Forensic evidence deepened the cracks in their alibi. Jason's fingerprints were all over the wrench, and there were no signs that David had ever climbed the ladder or touched the light fixture. Phone records revealed late-night calls and messages between Sarah and Jason, many exchanged only hours before the murder. Every thread the investigators pulled only led back to the same conclusion: the accident had been staged, and David Harris had been murdered. Sarah's composure crumbled during questioning. The weight of what she had done, coupled with Emily's cold betrayal in exposing her, became too much to bear. She tried to insist she hadn't meant for things to go that far, that she had been pressured, but her words did little to shield her from the truth. Jason remained silent through most of the interrogation, his confidence from earlier replaced with a hollow stare. The suburban family home, once filled with ordinary routines and quiet evenings, had become a crime scene. Yellow tape sealed off the garage where David had taken his last breath, and the community watched in disbelief as news of the arrest spread. Neighbors who once admired Sarah's grace and David's hard work whispered in shock about how the perfect image of their family had been destroyed in such a brutal way. Sarah's fear of exposure had driven her to the unthinkable. What she believed would protect her from losing everything only ensured that she lost far more. The lies, the affair, and the desperate attempt to keep it hidden had culminated in murder. And now, with investigators closing in and evidence stacking against them, Sarah and Jason had no way out. The crime was unraveling, and the tragic consequences of their choices were only just beginning to unfold. The trial became the final stage where every secret, every betrayal, and every reckless choice came to light. The courtroom was crowded from the very first day, neighbors and community members filling the benches to witness the downfall of the woman they once admired and the young man who had charmed his way into her family. The media seized on the story, calling it a suburban scandal turned deadly. For Emily, it was a nightmare made public, her family's darkest truth laid bare for everyone to see. The prosecution painted a clear picture of motive and opportunity. Sarah was a wife trapped in an affair with her daughter's boyfriend, desperate to protect her secret. Jason was the young lover, emboldened by his influence over her and eager to rid himself of the man who stood in the way. Together, they conspired to eliminate David. The evidence was undeniable. Jason's fingerprints on the wrench, Sarah's phone records filled with late-night messages, and Emily's testimony about how she discovered the affair. When Emily took the stand, the room grew silent. Her voice trembled as she described the night she found the incriminating texts and the devastation of realizing that her own mother had betrayed her in the worst possible way. She spoke of the tension that followed, the way her mother avoided her, and how Jason grew more distant until she knew something was deeply wrong. She told the court she had no doubt her father's death was not an accident. Her words cut through the room, and Sarah couldn't stop the tears from streaming down her face. For the first time, she realized her daughter was not only a witness against her, but someone she had lost forever. The defense tried to argue that Sarah had been manipulated by Jason, that she was vulnerable, lonely, and pressured into a plan she never truly wanted to be part of. They painted Jason as the instigator, someone who preyed on Sarah's weaknesses. Jason's attorneys, in turn, tried to shift the blame back onto Sarah, claiming she was the one who lured him into the affair and pushed for David's death to preserve her reputation. In the end, their desperate attempts only showed how fractured their alliance had become. The bond that once seemed unbreakable now crumbled under the weight of survival. The jury took only 2 days to reach a verdict. Sarah Harris was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. Jason Miller, though younger, was equally convicted as the direct assailant. The sentences were harsh. Sarah received life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Jason was sentenced to decades behind bars, ensuring he would never again walk free in his youth. The sentencing day was filled with silence broken only by sobs. Sarah stared straight ahead, refusing to look at her daughter, unable to face the hurt in Emily's eyes. Jason showed no emotion, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a blank stare. For Emily, the verdict brought no relief. Justice had been served, but it did nothing to heal the wound of betrayal or bring her father back. The quiet suburban neighborhood never recovered from the shock. Neighbors who once waved to Sarah across the fence now spoke of her in hushed voices, her name forever tied to scandal and murder. The Harris home was eventually sold, its cheerful appearance masking the horrors that had unfolded inside. People passing by whispered about the tragedy, turning the house into a landmark of whispered warnings. Emily moved away, unable to live among the memories that haunted her. She carried the pain with her, knowing she had lost not just her father but her mother as well. She built a new life, but the scars of betrayal never fully healed. Every time she thought of her mother, it wasn't with love but with the reminder of the night everything changed. Sarah had chosen desire over loyalty, and in doing so, destroyed the very family she was meant to protect. But behind prison walls, Sarah became just another inmate, stripped of the polished image she once presented to the world. She replayed the choices that had brought her there, haunted by the sound of her husband's final moments and her daughter's testimony against her. Jason adjusted quickly to prison life, blending in with the hardened men around him, but his charm no longer held power. The relationship that had once consumed them both dissolved into silence, each left to face the consequences alone. The story of Sarah Harris and Jason Miller became a cautionary tale, one that spread beyond the town and into wider headlines. It was told as a reminder of how quickly lives could unravel when temptation turned into obsession, and when betrayal crossed into violence. It showed how secrets hidden inside an ordinary home could ignite into tragedy, leaving nothing but broken families and ruined futures. In the end, what began as an affair meant to bring excitement to a quiet life ended in devastation. A husband was buried, a daughter left alone, and two people spent the rest of their days paying the price of a choice that could never be undone. The tragic murder of David Harris was not just a crime of passion, but a story of how betrayal corrodes everything it touches, leaving only destruction in its wake.